Welcome everyone to the INC Transportation Committee meeting for September 11th, 2025. We have a full meeting tonight. We're going to start with hearing about Denver's Shared Streets program, which we have heard about before as the principles for it were being developed, but now they're moving towards identifying particular streets and implementation. So we're happy to have Dana Hoffman here, who's a climate manager with DOTI. Next, we'll have the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, talking about their Speer and 23rd Bridges preferred alternatives. The public comment period for that is still open until next week. So hearing about it, getting questions answered, and then providing comment if you have it is all still possible. Third, we have Chris Nevitt, who's the chair of the Front Range Passenger Rail Board of Directors, telling us all about Front Range Passenger Rail. It's been a couple of years since we've heard from them, and there's been a lot happening regarding the legislature directing RTD, CDOT, Front Range Passenger Rail, and others to work together to start having a concrete plan for implementation. And then finally, the brand new news as of last week, Waymo autonomous cars are coming to Denver. So at the end of the meeting, we're going to hear from Executive Director Amy Ford from Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure about how that's going to work, how the regulation works, what we've learned from other cities. So it's a big meeting. Happy you're here. We will start with Dana Hoffman talking about Denver's Shared Streets program. You should be able to share your screen when ready.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invite to chat with you all tonight. I do hope you all have heard a bit about the Shared Streets program, but I am going to go back a little bit and talk about the development, and then we'll talk about the latest and greatest and what we're doing in terms of projects and getting more shared streets on the ground in Denver. Before I kick off,
you're sharing your whole screen, so we're seeing ourselves on your screen here. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Let me see if I can fix that.
Oh, you moved it away now. It looks great.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. Okay. So I don't think I've fully introduced myself. I'm Dana Hoffman. I am with the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DOTI. I tend to use that acronym. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And I've been with the department for about 8 years. I'm our transportation climate manager, and I am the city manager for one of our shared streets projects, which I'll talk about a little bit more in just a moment. So I'll give you a little more background on the Shared Streets program and where it is today. There are a couple ongoing projects. I'm the project manager for one of those projects, so I'm going to know quite a bit more about that project than some of the others that are ongoing, but can probably answer some basic questions about the other ones. And then we can talk about sort of what you can expect moving into the next couple of years. And I should have a few minutes for questions, although I do have to hop off a little before 6:30, most likely. So what is a shared street? For those of you who aren't familiar, this is a fairly new concept for the city of Denver. It really grows out for us. There are examples across the nation and across the world that use this concept overall, but for us as a city, it really started with COVID and us having to shut down a lot of our other areas and public spaces in 2020. So we ended up having these temporary barriers put up so people could use some of those additional public spaces in the street. You can see that sort of picture, and I'm sure some of you remember these, where we just had these quick barriers up and said, hey, this is more of a local only access street. It's really meant for people to use to walk and bike in the street itself. So more of a shared space. And we heard very loud and clear from community that they liked these spaces. We weren't able to maintain those temporary type barriers, but we promised the community we would develop a more finalized program with specific design guidelines to make sure these are safe and successful. So that is what we did. We went back and developed the Shared Streets program. I think some of you heard about that and may have been involved in the development of the program. So coming out of 2023, we had outlined some shared streets guidelines for us in terms of design. We had identified about a top 20 set of streets that could be good potential candidates moving forward. And then starting earlier this year, we have several streets moving forward. My project specifically kicked off very early this year and includes design of about 8 streets, it's looking like, to get to concept design. So we don't have, unfortunately, construction funding for that project. We do have design funding for a few of our other projects that are moving forward. So one of the things that we had developed in the program is a specific definition of what shared streets are, right? And this is really a vision for using streets differently than we do by and large today. So a shared street is really about low vehicle volumes, slow travel speeds, where people walking, biking, and rolling take priority. So all in the same space. So these are really meant to be throughways. Certainly, they remain part of our street network, but they also become more destination-like. They become more gathering space-like. And in many cases, we want these to be very conducive to temporary closures to cars, so completely closing off the street for short periods of time for things like farmers markets and festivals and that sort of thing. And you can take a look. These are all examples from other places that have really wonderful sort of examples of how shared streets can be developed. So key aspects of these shared streets, right? They're designed to prioritize pedestrians, most vulnerable users first, which requires really slow movement of all modes. They are not closed to vehicle access. There are some other programs that we've developed, right, that allow you to close off portions of streets temporarily or permanently. This is really a shared space. A really key aspect of these shared streets that you'll see more of is that they have more amenities. They are amenity-rich spaces so that they can be used for gathering. This generally means that we're talking about more trees. In some cases, it's green infrastructure that helps with wastewater, shade, seating, maybe it's public art, decorations, depending on the surrounding land uses. It'll be a slightly different mix of different things, which we'll get into here in a second. And thing to note is that we will probably be allowing shared streets to have on-street parking. That's part of them being a destination, but there are always a balance between the amount of amenities we can fit and the amount of on-street parking to be provided. So really thinking about creative curb use, like temporary loading facilities, will be really critical to be successful on these streets. This image comes from our guidelines. This is a commercial shared street, so it's useful to divide shared street design into two categories: those that are in a more commercial land use context and those that are in a more residential land use context. So I'm pointing out here that in a commercial context, some similar features across both, but we would have more social spaces most likely in a commercial context that help surrounding businesses, dining establishments be really successful. So these are some examples of sort of like the types of facilities and amenities you might see on a commercial street, more focused on providing those seating spaces, those gathering spaces. And some other things, you might have more of that gateway feel, the announcement of a placemaking type feel in a commercial shared street. 39th Avenue Greenway is a sort of mixed shared street. This one is more residential in nature, so it's a good example of what a residential space might look like. So you might have less tables with seating for dining and instead focus more on green infrastructure improvements to create that sort of park-like setting. Excuse me. So this one is more, here we go. This one is a different version of a commercial shared street. So this is a community shared street here. Again, these are other examples where you're really focusing in on that's trees and green infrastructure as opposed to more of that designing element. We also identified 3 categories, and I'm going to just run through these really quick. I know you guys have a very full schedule, but having these different levels so we can implement these accordingly. So curb and gutter quick build is using more quick win type facilities, things that you might have seen on some of our bike facilities, things you can screw into the ground and do quickly. Move too quick. Another version called curb and gutter permanent, where we start to introduce more concrete amenities, maybe removing pavement at certain areas, but maintaining that existing curb line and drainage structure. And then there's the bells and whistles version. 39th Avenue Greenway, again, is probably our only real example of this in the city of Denver. But this means you might fully eliminate that curb separation between modes. You might use different paving to fully create more of a plaza-like setting. So here's the exciting part. I think some of that might have been familiar, guys, but now we have a number of streets that are in some stage of development or another to become shared streets. This map highlights all of those. So on the left are shared streets projects that are moving forward that are not part of my project, so I know a little less about them. But obviously we have the existing 39th Avenue Greenway project. We have 21st Street here. Some of this will be more trail, but a section will be fully shared street that's in design. And North Acoma Street also in design. Wine Coop Street, sort of in front of Union Station, is going through a feasibility analysis. And then all the rest of these streets that you see spreading out a bit more into the city and written on the left and on the right here, excuse me, are streets that we are taking to concept design after evaluating them further for feasibility and talking to a few stakeholders. And we'll be getting concept design for these early next year. So all this started through some locational analysis that we did. This is really a desktop analysis to meet our design guidelines, make sure these are safe spaces, make sure they're successful places, and we narrowed down from there. I know I'm moving through this fast. I'm happy to move back through these slides. For the project that I just mentioned with those top 8 streets on the map, like I said, we started early this year, identifying and looking through those top streets that were identified through the program. And then we narrowed down that list based on sort of feasibility characteristics and what we thought would be most successful to start. Things like whether there is a good maintenance structure that we could utilize, if there are specific water or flood issues that might be more difficult to address. And then talking to some high-level stakeholders to understand if we'd missed anything or hadn't thought of anything. And now we're moving into conceptual design, and we'll be going out to the public in just the next few months. At the end of this process, we will have preliminary designs, and that'll include cost estimates. So we'll be able to go after things like a future bond or other grant funding to get a lot of these in the ground. So we don't know when they will be constructed, but we've taken that critical step to know the cost of each and make sure that they're the right fit and the right designs. So we are finalizing feasibility analysis here shortly. We're going to be having a number of pop-ups and public meetings near each of these roadways and be completing that conceptual design and have final preliminary designs for folks to see and envision for the future, probably by February or so next year. Race through that. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to jump back and answer any questions you guys have.
Yeah, thank you. As is our tradition, I will be looking in the chat for questions that people propose, and you can upvote the questions that you want to have asked most, etc. So turning first to David Mincer has a question about costs.
Should I be reading that or David's gonna go?
I think I can expand if you want, but I think it's pretty straightforward. That a lot of these look like they involve reconstruction, curb, gutter, pavement, and during the pandemic, the most expensive part was hiring a company to go around and keep the barriers in place and make sure they're not out of place. When I know in my neighborhood we would have been happy to do that. In other cities, they've kind of recruited residents to maintain these and even design them with art and whatnot. Has that been considered?
So the closest to that in our design guidelines are really that more curb and gutter feel. There are definitely some safety concerns that came up with the simple barriers out in the streets that our maintenance staff had to deal with. And we really wanted to have these shared streets have more amenities than just sort of the barriers and the signs. So yes, that full bells and whistles version that you saw, David, that is a major investment. I think we're proposing a mix of quicker sort of win type streets, design improvements, and the more bells and whistles versions, knowing that some of them could take a number of years to implement. So yeah, it's sort of a mix, but we tried to have those different levels available to us in our design guidelines.
Okay.
There was a request if you could put up the map of all those go forward streets while we're talking, that would help people frame their questions. And then we have a question from Thomas about coordinated planning with CPD. Thomas?
Yeah, this sounds very interesting, and we can see a lot of places, I think, in our own neighborhoods where we would like something in this direction, not necessarily as depicted, but what how does this fit into the neighborhood planning initiative process so that we can incorporate these kind of concepts, even though they're future oriented? I mean, the NPI process is future oriented. So how do we incorporate things like this that are still evolving and very new to the city?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Thomas. So I think that's one of the great things about setting up this program and having the specific guidelines in place. So one of the things as you're involved in the NPI process is to, through all of community engagement to help the CPD staff and the DOTI staff that are engaged on those plans to put forward streets that you think will be good candidates. And then we'd have to do that additional level of analysis to make sure that they could be safely implemented through the program. So for instance, streets that have ongoing frequent bus service, we've determined are not really very compatible with shared streets. So we would look through those criteria against the streets that have been raised in the NPI process. And if they generally meet those, we can add those to the future list of potential shared streets. And then it becomes a matter of identifying funds to then design and move them forward after that.
Okay, thank you. Both Michael and Robert have a question about public engagement on the design. Michael, do you want to ask the question?
My question is, how are you going to engage with registered neighborhood organizations in the pertinent areas in the next phase? For example, East 16th Avenue, I do not believe that we've heard anything from you all about this.
Yep, great question. So we have just now set up to launch public engagement. So we did invite RNO leaders and a few other specific small group stakeholders in a focus group style to help identify if these could be good candidates. But as we move forward into identifying what would be good on the street and weighing alternatives, we're now going out to the public. So you wouldn't have heard yet about it, but you will be hearing about it as part of your RNO in the next probably October, November, December. So our plan is to have a number of pop-ups as well as to visit RNOs. If you have meetings that you'll have us at, we would love that. It's always a good way to reach folks. We can work with RNOs as well. We'd like to flyers along these corridors to get the word out for these public engagements. And then the website is now up and live, and we will have a website component as well. So number of public engagements, we do want to have more meetings with RNO. So Michael, I don't know if you have access to the calendar for your meetings, but if you have those things available in sort of that October through December timeframe, we'd love to get in touch with you so we can potentially come to your meetings, come to you to talk about the different concept alternatives and get feedback on them.
And can you give us the website address?
Yes, I will pop that in the chat.
Okay, next, just confirming the funding is not lined up for all of these yet, as you said in your slides, right? These are the draft targets. You have funding for design, don't have funding for implementation yet. Is that what we heard?
We have funding to complete preliminary design. So that really is early stage, right? It's pretty conceptual. We will need to seek funding probably as one go to do design and construction as one process for all of these. What we'll come away with is concepts of understanding what kind of amenities are really wanted, what level of street. To the earlier question from David about, are we happy with a more curb and gutter type? Or are we really going for that more permanent, more extensive feel? And a cost estimate, and that'll really allow us to pursue the full design and construction funding. But yes, we'll end with preliminary design at this stage for the project.
Okay. Robert had a question about the roles of streets and streets playing many roles. Robert?
Oh, you call it? Oh, I guess the question I had was if you had a proposed street and the existing street was not only a collector street through the neighborhood, but it was also a commercial street. How would you approach this with that type of design, particularly if that street was a primary access point for fire trucks?
Yeah, so our larger collectors are probably not going to be good candidates for these streets, simply because we have a goal of very low vehicle volumes. And that's so that people feel very safe and comfortable walking in that shared space, and that we'd have really slow speeds. So, for instance, Larimer Street is, that you can see up in Rhino here, is going to be this street with the highest volumes we're considering as a shared street today. So anything much bigger than that is going to be probably too challenging, or the trade-offs are too high, because we do need to maintain the network. The way that we deal with that, right, we do need to maintain clear for our fire vehicles. We've already initiated that conversation with the fire department. They have clearance requirements that we are going to have to meet, but there's a lot that you can do within those clearance requirements. They will definitely include, on streets with higher volumes, treatments that encourage traffic calming, and in some cases we are looking at hardened diverters so that, you know, one movement is limited, so like left turn or a single direction. We're looking at, for instance, one-waying on these very short stretches as a way to limit movements and use that space as efficiently as possible. So it does depend on design, Robert. Every street's different, but broadly speaking, I think I've answered your question. Like a larger collector is probably not going to be a street that makes sense to make into a shared street.
Okay, well, not a larger collector, but the criteria that I talked about applies to Tennyson. In the area where it looked at, I mean, that's the Alcott Fire Station transits to the south of that. And if you were going to limit that lane in that 2 or 3 block area, the street in that 2 or 3 block area to a single lane, that could probably be problematic. As well as putting type of traffic calming along there. I've talked to DFD with regards to how they're responding to West 29th Avenue with the traffic calming elements in there, and those elements don't mix very well with fire trucks.
Yeah, there is always a challenge in ensuring that our emergency vehicles can have the access that they need to meet their, you know, safety requirements and meeting their needs, and creating spaces that are slower moving for pedestrians and other users. So, for instance, with Tennyson, that was a street we looked at initially, right? And we heard from the stakeholders and fire department, and we knew that the volumes were very high, and that the surrounding network is not very able to account for the vehicles otherwise. And we had to remove it from the list for us to advance for that reason. So there are just challenges we have to face in design. And in some cases, we'll look at a street and say it doesn't meet the criteria. And in some cases, we will tackle those challenges in design and work very closely with fire to come up with creative solutions.
Okay. So the other map that you had up here that had I don't know what the title of it is. It's not this map, but it was the other one, future proposed project that showed Tennyson. You're now not considering that?
Maybe at a long future time, it will be a better fit. But right now, these are the streets that we're looking at moving forward. That doesn't mean more streets can't be looked at. Tennyson was on the original list, but is not being moved forward as part of this project or any ongoing projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And just to be clear, that doesn't mean no improvements on Tennyson, but they wouldn't be this shared street pedestrian first kind of focus. It might be other various kinds of
there's
improvements.
a number of other programs, right, that DOTI runs that, you know, can make safety improvements or even traffic calming related improvements at spot locations, just not the shared street that really using that shared space.
And if you have a moment, we have one more question about a specific street, Larimer. James, do you want to ask your question about the various roles of Larimer and how that might evolve?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Beautiful. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. I was looking at Larimer in particular on this map, and I recall that going back to 2022, 2023, DOTI had a map that in Denver Moves that was very ambitious, that basically Larimer would become a pedestrian corridor all the way from like Lodo up towards Rhino, and that there had been, you know, previous to that, there was talk about having there be a transit way on Larimer, and that was getting shipped over to Blake and Market. So I was curious if the projects overlap, is that still the understanding, or has the Larimer side been scaled back since then?
You know, I can follow up on that, James. I'm not familiar with that sort of plan to make that kind of significant change on Larimer. Larimer's has seen a lot of evolution over time. For instance, you know, there was a permitted closure between 28th and 9th, right?
Mm-hmm.
And bus service was temporarily moved over. I am not familiar, like with Denver Moves Everyone, that we had any others, you know, grand different plans for Larimer. But I can go back and ask the team. At this point, my understanding is a shared street concept is the most significant additional proposed change for this corridor right now. But let me go back and talk to the team. I might not have the history that you're referring to. Apologies.
Well, I hope it's not history. So thank you, though.
Yeah, if you want to maybe throw your email in the chat, I can try and get back to you if I can find out more on that.
I will do that. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Okay, we have reached the end of our time here. Thank you so much, Dana, for staying with us here till 6:30. And we will, if you have your contact information, I know somebody put in the URL for the project, but if you have your contact information, that would be great. Glad to see some specific ideas moving. And I was actually wondering, I'm seeing some change in the past month or so on Tremont Place. So I imagine that what they're doing now is coordinated with the overall vision, even though it's not funded by this vision. So change is happening. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thanks for the great questions.
Next, we're going to turn to Dan Fischer from CDOT to talk about the Speer and 23rd Bridges proposal. Dan, not everyone here might have the full background, so I'm sure you'll talk about the purpose and then really focus on the design so that people can be prepared for any public comment they want to give in the comment period that's still open.
Absolutely, yeah.
Looks great.
See. I'm not super familiar with Zoom. Can you all see my presentation in presentation mode?
It looks perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, good evening to all of you. My name is Dan Fischer. I'm a professional engineer at CDOT, and I am managing the I-25 Speer and 23rd project. So it's really good to be here with all of you tonight to be able to give you an update on the project. I definitely want to thank Joel for the invitation. I do have a fair amount of material to get through, so I would ask that we try to save questions for the end so that I can get through everything. Definitely will do my best to save at least 5 to 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Otherwise, I'll just kind of set the scene a little bit more for all of you before I dive into this too much, and give you a kind of a high-level overview of where the project is currently here at CDOT. So we have identified our recommended proposed action. So like Joel mentioned, I'll certainly be giving you quite a bit more information about that. And Joel also mentioned the public open house. We did hold that towards the end of August, and I just want everyone to be aware that all of the materials from that open house are still available on our website. They do have quite a bit more information than I could ever hope to share with you in less than 30 minutes. So, you know, at the end of my time tonight, if you feel like you have any unanswered questions, or if you're looking for any more detail, I would certainly recommend that you go and have a look at those materials. And of course, let us know what you think about the project. We are still accepting comments and survey responses. So before I sign off tonight, I'll make sure that you all know how to access all of that information and the survey as well. So yeah, quick process overview. As I mentioned, we do have a recommended alternative identified for the project. So just a quick summary of kind of the overall process that you know, allowed us to ultimately make that decision. I do want to mention that one of the foundational pieces of it was the development of the purpose and need statement. And basically, the development of that involved doing an assessment of the existing conditions so that we could identify what we needed to try to accomplish on the project. So basically, in other words, it's the problems that we needed to try to solve, right? And so because that is such a foundational piece of the process, I do just want to recap the elements of the purpose and need here really quickly. So it set forth goals such as improving safety issues identified within the interchange complex, improving transportation connection across I-25 for all road users, providing crossings with adequate vertical clearance over I-25, and addressing the deteriorating condition and the increasing maintenance needs of the Speer and 23rd bridges. So here's a little bit closer look at the overall process. Essentially, after we finalized that purpose and need in about the early 2024 time period, we then developed our entire alternatives screening process, the screening levels, as well as the criteria that would ultimately guide all of our alternatives analysis. And I'll just mention as well that the whole process was really designed to be able to evaluate and select the best design option based on all of the criteria that we were considering. So we did use 3 different screening levels. You can see those there on the left side of this graphic. They were the purpose and need level screening, comparative level screening, and refined level screening. There in the center of the graphic is the specific screening metrics that we were paying attention to in each of those specific screening levels. There's quite a few there, so I won't read through them, but that gives you a pretty good snapshot of the types of things we were paying attention to. And then there on the right side of the graphic is basically how the alternatives analysis played out. So you can see that we did start with 5 different alternatives at Speer and 3 different alternatives at 23rd. We took all of those into that purpose and need level screening and essentially asked the question, do these 8 alternatives meet the purpose and need? And we determined that all of them but 1 did meet the purpose and need. So then we took the remaining 7 into that comparative level screening, compared the respective alternatives to one another. In that level of screening, we were able to identify our recommended alternative for 23rd Avenue, partly because we only took 2 into that level to begin with. And then we did have to take Speer to a more refined level. We took 2 alternatives for Speer to that next level of screening, and then ultimately made our decision about the recommended alternative for Speer at that point in time. So Next, I'll kind of show you the exact results for each interchange at their respective final levels of screening. Again, if you want to see all the details about the entire screening process, I would definitely recommend checking out our online public open house materials. Again, I just won't quite have time to go through every single detail with you tonight, but go ahead and start off with the 23rd Avenue comparative screening results. So like I mentioned, CDOT was able to identify the recommended alternative for 23rd Avenue here in the comparative level of screening. You'll see here that the bridge replacement only alternative in this case wasn't applicable because it had been screened out in an earlier level of screening. And so we were pretty much just comparing the closed 23rd Avenue access to the 23rd Avenue grade. And we did decide to carry forward the 23rd Avenue grade, but not the ramp closure option. And you will see on the next few slides what ultimately kind of supported that decision to make that the recommended alternative and kind of what set it apart from the ramp closure alternative. So the 23rd Avenue grade is recommended as the proposed action to be evaluated during the NEPA process because it balances the needs of all local stakeholders. Specifically, it achieves this balance because it improves safety on I-25 by increasing the distance to merge. This is the case because out there today, the 23rd Avenue on-ramp and the Speer Boulevard off-ramp to eastbound Speer are really close together, and they are in very dangerous conflict with one another because the merge distance between them is very short and extremely substandard. And so the nice thing about the braid is that it will make those ramps completely independent from one another, so that vehicles merging onto I-25 from 23rd do not have to be in conflict with vehicles that are simultaneously trying to exit to Speer. So that will make for a significant safety improvement on I-25. Next up, the braid enhances safety for everyone using 23rd Avenue, and that's whether they are walking, biking, or driving. And this is the case primarily because of the much improved geometry that you see there on the east side of the bridge. There will no longer be those free-flowing ramps that come into 23rd Avenue at odd angles. Instead, there will be a controlled intersection there. There will be a new signal. And so that's, one of the really big reasons that this alternative does enhance safety for everyone. And I know that there's a lot of interest specifically in the safety of non-motorists. So I will talk in more detail about that on the slides that are coming up here. And then the last 2 points that I want to bring up on this slide are that the braid maintains I-25 access for nearby homes, community resources, and businesses. And lastly, it accommodates the entire community, whether that's the residents and their families who live close by, or the businesses and their customers in the area. It also accommodates people walking and biking, like I've mentioned a little bit already, and it is also beneficial in the long run for emergency services and city operations. So kind of those crucial community services to be able to do their part. Now, speaking of accommodating the whole community, I do absolutely want to take a bit more time, like I said, to highlight the non-motorist aspect of this. So for pedestrians, bikes, and micromobility device users, and how the safety will be improved for them as a result of this 23rd Avenue braid configuration. So again, the geometry that I mentioned already and just the overall configuration of the bridge itself are really kind of the biggest contributing factor to these substantial safety improvements. Again, those free flow ramps that I know no one enjoys out there will go away. And once again, we will have a signal there at the east side, so it'll be much more controlled. And then one of the changes that we haven't really talked about at all yet is the addition of dedicated left turn lanes. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the existing condition out there and how left turning vehicles basically have to obstruct through traffic behind them. And so what often happens is that they get impatient, they feel the pressure of the vehicles behind them, and so they misjudge gaps in traffic, or they take an unnecessary risk to make that left turn. They may not even be looking for bikes and pedestrians in the first place because they're feeling that pressure and getting impatient. But it's also often the case, I think, that even if they see a bike or a pedestrian, they may kind of misjudge, for example, the speed at which a bike might be coming down the hill in the eastbound direction on 23rd Avenue. So those dedicated left turns, as well as including protected left turn arrows, are going to be huge for the safety of bikes and pedestrians here at 23rd. And then beyond those core significant safety improvements, I do just want to also mention that we have a lot of opportunities still to implement other improvements as well as we continue to work through the design here at 23rd. So that could include things like leading pedestrian intervals, bicycle signals, maybe getting creative to minimize the speed at which drivers make turning movements, or how turning vehicles interact with bikes. That'd kind of be specifically right turning vehicles, I guess. Also, we are investigating a little bit the potential for raised crosswalks or raised intersections here at 23rd. That's all stuff that we've heard that the public is interested in so far from the feedback that we've received based on the public open house. And so I just want you all to know that we are absolutely going to do our due diligence to listen to the suggestions of the public and determine what we can do here at 23rd to truly maximize all of these safety improvements. And then the last thing that I want to make sure to mention is that we are also planning to include physical protection for the dedicated bike lanes across 23rd Avenue, pretty specifically at the bridge. But anyways, you see here a few examples of things we could do in that regard. And one of the things we're definitely interested in hearing from the public is whether they have a preference for any particular style of physical protection. I think so far we've primarily heard that really any of these, kind of with the exception of the flexi posts, would be acceptable in the eyes of the public. There may be a slight preference overall for the raised sidewalk level bike lanes that you see in that top right corner there. But again, at the end of the day, this is something that is important to us at CDOT to make sure we get right. And so we are absolutely making it a priority as we continue to advance our design. Okay, so I'll go ahead and move on to Speer now. Again, I'm showing here the final level of screening for Speer, so that's the refined level. And in this case, it did come down to the traditional diamond interchange and the diverging diamond interchange. And it was the diverging diamond interchange that we did end up carrying forward. So I'll go ahead and walk you through the distinguishing characteristics of the DDI that supported that decision. And I may step away for a quick second to see if I can turn the lights back on in here. Apologies. Okay. So when compared to the traditional diamond interchange, diverging diamond interchanges generally experience 15% fewer crashes and 45% fewer crashes, resulting in a fatality or serious injury. They also remove left turn conflicts, which improves safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers alike. And diverging diamond interchanges also provide short and convenient crossings, as well as a wide barrier protected center path for cyclists and pedestrians. So consideration of these three characteristics of a diverging diamond interchange, which by the way, we also sometimes refer to as a DDI. So if you hear me say that, that's what it means. So yeah, those three characteristics were pivotal in CDOT's decision to choose the DDI as the recommended alternative here at Speer Boulevard. It is a really good option for the overall safety of all users. You'll see on my next slide here an example of that barrier protected center path that I mentioned. That's really great at limiting the exposure of bikes and pedestrians. I do also want to be sure to mention that we have heard some concern from the public about there potentially being uncontrolled pedestrian crossings at the ramp terminals. So like this is an example of a location that people are concerned about. And so those are areas that we are very focused on here at CDOT right now to make sure that we make as safe as possible in the final configuration. That's another location where we are looking into potentially implementing raised crosswalks. We may be able to reduce the curve radii at those or near those crossings to kind of slow vehicles down. But other possibilities also include either a traditional traffic signal or a hawk signal at those crossings as well. So again, it's on our minds, and we've heard the concern from the public, and we definitely want to make sure we get that right. So I do have a couple images here showing an example of a DDI. This one specifically is at McCaslin Boulevard and US 36 in Superior, Colorado. So, you know, if you've never experienced a DDI either as a motorist or a non-motorist, this is a really great example that's relatively local, and I'd certainly recommend that you take a little trip if you have some time and experience it for yourself. Here in the left image, I'm showing what a DDI crossover looks like. This crossover element is what allows left turns to be eliminated, or at least left turns across oncoming traffic. You can also see here the angle at which the two directions of traffic cross one another. So that's also a beneficial aspect of the DDI because that's a better angle to basically reduce the severity of crashes. You don't really have like a T-bone type of crash with that type of angle. And then also in that left image, you can see the signalized crossings. So there's one here and one here as well. And it's a good example of how those crossings only have to deal with traffic coming from one possible direction. So, you know, this crossing, for example, can only have traffic coming from this direction, right? And simultaneously, the opposite crossing can only have traffic coming from this direction. So that is a pretty good safety feature. And then the image on the right here shows that center path that's protected by a barrier, which is obviously a major safety feature. Now that we've gone through all the details of how the alternatives were chosen at each separate interchange, this slide here shows basically what they would look like combined into one recommended design. So you can see the diverging diamond interchange at Speer here and the 23rd Avenue braid here. So this is what we're moving forward in our preliminary design currently, and also moving forward in our NEPA analysis process. And I'll just mention that a key part of the NEPA analysis process is comparing the recommended design to the no action. So that review and documentation process will help us to disclose all of the impacts and figure out the potential mitigation to those impacts. It'll also help us figure out the necessary permits we'll need, all of that could result from the proposed action. And again, public involvement is certainly a key aspect of the NEPA process. And so that's why it continues to be an ongoing effort for us. All right. I've thrown quite a bit of information at all of you, but I'm sure you're still wondering basically what the next steps on the project are going to be. And so I'll share our schedule with you really quickly. We're obviously kind of in this right half of this schedule now in the late 25 timeframe. So as you can see, for the rest of this year and into about mid next year, we will be doing that NEPA analysis and documentation, as well as working on our preliminary design, which we are currently working to take to a 30% level. Now, to be totally and completely honest with you, beyond that kind of mid 2026 timeframe, there isn't a ton of real certainty about how the schedule is going to play out. We do pretty commonly get the question, or questions, when's construction going to start and how long is it going to take? But those aspects are really still dependent on quite a few moving parts. And so unfortunately, we do still have to be a little bit vague about that. But to avoid giving you a complete non-answer, I would say it's pretty reasonable to expect the construction will start sometime within the next few years, and it's also likely to take a couple of years. So that's kind of all I can say about it right now. But other than that, I just want to make clear that as things become more clear for us here at CDOT, we'll definitely keep the public apprised of that information. Okay, I know I'm starting to kind of press up on my time here a little bit. So the last thing I want to make sure you all know is how to access the public open house materials that are online. So yeah, we are accepting comments and survey responses through next Monday, the 15th of September. This QR code here will take you to the public involvement page. Of course, the URL address will too. And I can certainly post the URL in the chat before I leave today if anyone needs that.
Yeah, thank you. A clickable link would be great. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. What I'm going to do is first take questions from the chat that are about the 23rd, and then we'll switch to the Speer. So the highest upvoted question here is from Alejandra on 23rd about this alternative versus potential others. Alejandra?
What? I won? I wasn't expecting that. I forgot my question, but hi, Dan.
Hey, Alejandra, how are you?
So when I was talking to Jacob at the open house, he agreed that the safest alternative, the most people-friendly alternative would have been closing the on and off ramps. It also would have been the most cost-efficient alternative. And so I'm wondering why you didn't go with that. Also, would have get us closer to the greenhouse reduction emission goals. And I know that there was a lot of pushback from special interests on that. But I wonder, as advocates, how can we, since we seem to have lost this fight, at least right now, how can we do better next time? Or how can we, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words.
Okay, well, yeah, I think the simple fact of the matter, right, is that the closed 23rd access alternative would have been the safest. But we ultimately decided that we could make substantial safety improvements there at 23rd. And again, because of all of the various stakeholders in this area, we decided that it was important to balance all of the needs, so that basically all the stakeholders benefited at least to some degree. No one was negatively impacted, and so we basically viewed it as kind of a win-win. It's good for the local economy, and all of that stuff.
Okay, let's be sure we get to another couple questions here. Still staying with 23rd, Nathan had a question about the overall width. Nathan?
Yeah, I noticed on the diagram that it looked like you were making the intersections considerably larger and adding more lanes. Is that accurate?
Let me go back to that.
Especially on the left of the diagram there, it looks like at least another lane and significantly wider crosswalk. I just don't really understand why something like, a protected roundabout or something wouldn't be appropriate for these places. You talked a lot about, pedestrian safety and slowing cars down, and I think you said like creative ways to stop them from turning quickly. Wouldn't adding like a protected roundabout solve all of those things at once and be cheaper than a new stoplight?
I think we did evaluate roundabouts here at 23rd early on in the project, and what often becomes challenging with roundabouts is basically like the 3D aspect of it, right? So we're raising the bridge here, and we're gonna have to tie everything in and have kind of a new profile across 23rd, and so. There's always so many challenges when it comes to engineering and making everything kind of tie together. So I think that was the biggest challenge when we first considered roundabouts anywhere here on 23rd.
Okay, that there are like intersections along, I think it's 70 in particular, that has a dog bone crossing over the highway over 70. So maybe that could be used as an example. And yeah, as someone says in chat, I think that's something we could probably handle, right? It just seems like a good balance of solutions, so I'm surprised it wasn't considered.
Yeah, let's our next speaker, Chris Nevitt, has generously given some of his time to be sure we can complete these Q&A. So thank you very much, Chris. Let's move to Speer. But just as a comment before we leave 23rd, I, for one, appreciate that because this is going to remain mixed bike ped and vehicle, that there's definitiveness about who's stopping and going when. Certainly sometimes roundabouts can be good because it keeps traffic flowing, but I'm kind of a skeptic, especially when highway conditions are leading off onto non-highway conditions, that because the normal case is that traffic doesn't stop, that it would really be comfortable for bikes and peds. So I'm setting up the comment for Speer where I have the concerns you anticipate, but here definitiveness to who gets to go when. So let's go to comments on Speer. And with regard to the diverging diamond interchange, Jake Cohen had the highest upvoted comment. Jake?
Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Dan, for being here. I think I've been to the 36 intersection, and I thought it was a world-class driving experience. Like, truly amazing if you're in a car, which I understand why that's appealing as a traffic engineer. It really feels like the traffic flow for vehicles is really, really stellar. The problem that I have was I got out and I walked through the intersection and I found it really quite unpleasant. I I felt like I was being overprotected by concrete because there was concerns from the engineers about my safety. And then it was really loud and like truly just a really awful experience from a noise, pollution, and experience, but also crossing the street because not every driver is accustomed to a diverging diamond. I felt some real touch and go when going through the crosswalks. I'm not familiar. I have been in other diverging diamonds. I've not been in a diverging diamond that is in a neighborhood in a center city, especially one that's planned to have basically 100,000 people that live like within blocks of it when the River Mile and Ball Arena are done. I've never seen that, and I think with good reason. So, have we ever found examples of an urban walkable area with diverging diamonds? And then I also am wondering if we've really considered BRT in this. I just have a lot of concerns that this seems like a design that maybe works for conditions today, but we're going to take it out in 10 years. And that's going to be a real dang shame because it's going to be really expensive. But I just don't think we've considered the pedestrian volume that is going to make the 16th Street Bridge to the Highlands look kind of small as far as pedestrian volume. So I don't know if we have examples of like truly urban cities with walkable populations with diverging diamonds in the middle of the urban core. I'd love to see that. I can't find any examples.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, the question is whether there are examples of that.
Yes.
Okay. That is a good question. I don't know if we did necessarily look for examples that are in an urban core like you mentioned. But I think our analysis of the alternative is still supported. I'm a little confused how you would feel overprotected by barrier. I mean,
if you have to build a lot of
barriers
concrete to keep
there.
pedestrians safe, then it projects to the pedestrian that the experience is not safe. If you walk down 13th Avenue in Denver, I think you'll see this experience and you'll feel how few pedestrians want to walk on the side of the street with a concrete wall to protect them. It doesn't feel safe. But it's also like you're sitting in the middle of a highway. Like at least if you're on the side, you get noise protection on one side. And walking through the middle, you're just like it's like you're walking through a median.
Yeah, I mean, I think one counterpoint to that, and you can agree or disagree, it's up to you, but if you're on the outside of the bridge, you are exposed to the noise of the freeway below, whereas if you're, and also the arterial, whereas if you're in the middle of Speer in this case, you have at least some buffer from the noise that's coming from I-25.
Okay, but
just to keep us moving here, Dan, there's a number of people in the chat here who I hope will provide public comment as well, who are also in their own ways questioning how nice this is for pedestrians. All the crossings you have to do as a pedestrian to get across, the traffic moving around, etc. So I'm not going to call on everybody because they all seem to be making a lot of the same points of great for cars, not a great experience for pedestrians. And so, and I think it was a good question. If there is a place you can find where there's an urban example, thank you so much for that, Jake. Looking up and down about this, Lucia just had a question about CDOT's role versus Denver. Lucia?
Yeah, I'm wondering why DOTI isn't more involved with this because I know it's going over I-25, but these are Denver streets.
Yeah, DOTI is very much in the room. we are involving them pretty much every step of the way. Yeah, that would be my response to that. They certainly are involved.
Okay, we'll just sort of end. I'll take the privilege of asking the last question here, making the last comment is there's something particularly strange about a project that is adding controls at slip ramps on 23rd, where they were desperately needed. Those were very, very dangerous crossings for people not in cars. But then on the diverging diamond, having unsignalized places where people have to frogger across slip lanes and several of them. So I really hope you do look at controlling those crossings because otherwise it's pretty hostile and you have to be really willing to run when it's your turn to run. And that's I hope you can see the perversity of these two elements of the same project, one solving a problem and one reintroducing a quite similar problem at the diverging diamond.
Yeah, and like I said, we're definitely looking into it and going to make it as safe as we possibly can. So.
Okay, thank you so much. And if we could take you up on the offer to paste a clickable link in the chat for people to get to the website and provide public comment. And you're welcome to stay, of course, and engage with any of the comments we didn't get to. Thank you so much for joining us and really appreciate that the timing worked out with the extended comment period that after this meeting, there's still a few days. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we'll now turn to Chris Nevitt. Chris Nevitt is the chair of the 5 Points Passenger Rail Board. I'm going to make you co-host. And
5 Points Passenger Rail Board.
Oh boy, I you know where I live, man. Every time I see FP, Front Range Passenger Rail, and I'm tired, and I'm having a root canal tomorrow. This is too much information.
Oh, I am sorry, man.
Mr. Nevitt, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. So, if I understood you right, I've got about 30 minutes. I think I'll take about 20 minutes to do this razzle dazzle and then 10 minutes for questions. So number one, it's nice to be back here at INC. It's been a long time. Most of you probably don't know who I am or have forgotten me, but I used to be on city council, so I had a fair amount of traffic with INC, and I see my old friend Michael Henry there. Nice to see you. Let me share my screen. Oh, geez, how do I do this? 1, 2. I think this is the correct one.
Looks pretty good. We're seeing the full details of the buttons around the screen, but we are seeing the content.
Right. So you're seeing Front Range Passenger Rail update, that thing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, new transportation option for Colorado's Front Range is Front Range Passenger Rail, but really it's not a new transportation option. It's a transportation option that we had many, many years ago, and people enjoyed, and then it vanished as the car gained ascendance. And having Front Range Passenger Rail has been a dream for several generations now, and we're gonna deliver it. So who is we? We are the Front Range Passenger Rail District. So we were created by the General Assembly of Colorado in 2021. Over here on the right, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around. That's a map of the district. It's the largest special district in Colorado history. It has a statutory mandate to plan, finance, construct, operate intercity passenger rail through this corridor all the way from Wyoming to New Mexico through these principal station areas. And as a special district, it has the ability to put something on the ballot for the voters of the district to approve a tax to do all this work. So a little bit more about how the board is constructed, so you know sort of what the interests are that are focused on this effort. The core of it is metropolitan planning organizations. So if you don't know what an MPO is, you're probably familiar with DRCOG. DRCOG is the MPO for the Denver-Boulder metropolitan area. So there are 4 representatives from DRCOG. There's representatives from the Pikes Peak COG, which is Colorado Springs, representatives from Northern Front Range, which is Fort Collins, Pueblo COG, and South Central, which is Trinidad. So a lot of representatives from the Council of Governments. There's 6 appointees from the governor that sort of cover some special interests and expertise like transportation design or finance. Labor has a seat. CDOT, of course, is represented. And then because we wanted everyone at the same table, we added key players who will have a big role in delivering Front Range passenger rail, and that's the freight railroads, Amtrak as a potential provider, RTD, of course, the I-70 corridor, and the states of New Mexico and Wyoming. So wall to wall. One of the principal motivations, and it tends to sort of come up first, is the issue of congestion and Front Range passenger rail and how it relates to congestion. You know, I mean, you can see the stat there. You know, the average Coloradan spends almost 2.5 days sitting on their butts in traffic. And if I-25 is part of your experience, you're spending more time than that. That is not only a personal burden in terms of time wasted and risk of accidents and costs of fuel. It's a huge economic burden on the state as well. $3.5 billion annually is lost to traffic congestion. And that problem is not going to get better. That problem is going to get worse. So Colorado is a great place to live. We love living here. A lot of other people want to live here too. And so we're going to see several million more people in the coming decades come to Colorado, and that's going to make congestion considerably worse. And if anyone thinks that, you know, that Front Range passenger rail or transit, I mean, I think I'm talking to a friendly audience here, but you know, it has been brought up in many quarters that transit is sort of a special thing on top of the fundamental thing, which is roads, and it's an additional cost on top of roads. It should be understood that roads are fantastically expensive, and adding lanes to highways is spectacularly expensive. As someone has, you know, said, I think it was Einstein, that, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity. That's what we've been doing with our highways. And somebody else, just as clever but not as famous as Einstein, said dealing with congestion by adding lanes is like dealing with obesity by getting bigger pants. So this is a fool's errand. We don't want to keep repeating it. We want to provide a different option, which is Front Range passenger rail. And what's sort of on this slide is the sort of the broad public collective benefits from passenger rail. But I just kind of want to highlight, you know, this picture here, this little old lady happily riding the train. You know, right wingers will tell you that transit and rail are, you know, a communist conspiracy. But I think passenger rail is in service to the most fundamental of American values, and that is freedom, the freedom to make your own choices about how you want to move around your community, how you want to get from A to B, and having a passenger rail option to connect to the communities of the Front Range is the very definition of freedom. So some people will want to make that choice. Others cannot cannot drive and need to have that choice. And if you think about it, currently, the current state is your government is telling you what to do. If you want to travel to Pueblo, say, your government is saying, yeah, there's only one way to do that. That's to drive. So that's what you have to do. We want to provide options, choices, freedom. The benefits collectively are legion, of course, reductions in congestion, as we talked about, also reductions in pollution, fewer crashes, fewer fatalities. Trains are incredibly safe, less wear and tear on the roads. We get to delay the enormous expenses with respect to the highways. There's the connectivity to commercial centers, but also connectivity and access to higher education and to healthcare. And the local economic impacts are enormous, as we know here in Denver, because of all the development that we've seen around light rail stations. So one thing that I do need to highlight, and you know, people start thinking about Front Range Passenger Rail and they're excited and they're like, oh, I want a station in my community. There are limits to that. So Front Range Passenger Rail is intercity rail, not commuter rail. So the stations need to be much further apart, connecting whole communities, not just intercity or inner city stops. Our imperative from the state legislature is to have our train service be competitive with the car. So that means moving as fast as possible, and every stop slows that down. And then there are federal constraints too, with respect to what qualifies as intercity rail, and the focus is on putting stations in, you know, dense walkable areas. Here's some more detail on the service that we're proposing to deliver. So one of the ambitions that we hear from a lot of people is, oh, high-speed rail. We want a high-speed rail. We want you know, something like a bullet train or the TGV in France. And our goal is to deliver rail service as fast as possible. We think you deserve it, not just your grandkids. And one of the ways that we can do that as fast as possible and as cheaply as possible is to use existing freight rail corridors. Rather than building all new corridors, we can use existing freight rail corridors, and that speeds the time to market and makes it a whole lot cheaper. So we will be using the freight rail corridors. We'll be using a speed limit of 80 miles an hour. I'll get to a little bit more on that in a second. That's dictated again by the fact that we're using freight rail corridors. 9 principal stations. So think of Denver in the middle, 4 stations to the north, Boulder, Longmont, Loveland, Fort Collins, 4 stations to the south, Littleton, Douglas County, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo, and then future service on to Wyoming and New Mexico, or Trinidad and New Mexico. Starter service in 2029. I'll come to that in just a second. And again, the whole ambition is to be to be competitive with driving a car. So less than 4 hours all the way from Fort Collins to Pueblo. Right now we're in the middle of, we're not in the middle, we're at the end, but our principal enterprise is the service development plan. And the service development plan is a very long, complex, detailed document. We're doing it in collaboration with CDOT. CDOT, sort of the principal writer of it. And the service development plan lays out all the details with respect to the route, the frequency of service, all the cost, the fare structure, all the infrastructure improvements that have to be made in order to make passenger rail possible, as well as a phasing program for how we get from where we are now with nothing to what we're aiming for is 10 round trips a day. Service development plan is also vital for securing federal funding. As everybody is probably aware, federal funding is currently not heavy on the ground, but we anticipate that will change in the future. And when it does, we want to be ready. And that means having a service development plan ready to go. So this is all the activities associated with the service development plan. And as you can see from the Gantt chart, we've been working on it ever since we got started. And we anticipate getting the final report done by the end of this year. So then we will have the service development plan in the can and be prepared to do environmental work and prepared to accept federal money. This is a interesting diagram. This shows our modeling of the demand for front range passenger rail. It's expressed as percentages rather than as numbers, because the numbers will change as we add trains. As we add round trips and as we add cars to the trains, we'll build up to, more and more passengers. But this is sort of the distribution of demand. And you can see that well over half has Denver as the origin or destination. And I think that's intuitive, but it's also important to see that there's quite a bit of additional demand travel that isn't just Denver focused, that is in other parts of the Front Range. So, a third of the traffic you can see is up here, not having anything to do with Denver, but to between Boulder and Fort Collins, a little less in the southern part, but between Littleton, Douglas County, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, etc. So this Front Range Passenger Rail will provide a lot of connectivity among those communities, as well as providing connectivity to and from Denver for those communities. This is coming to that issue of the speed limit. So the existing freight rail tracks, with the improvements that we anticipate, we can operate at a speed limit of 80 miles an hour. So top speed 79 miles an hour. And again, I've heard it many times, people want to be able to go faster, which is a perfectly reasonable ambition, but there's a trade-off. And again, our imperative is to deliver a train to you that you can use as fast and as cheaply as possible. And to get just from 80 miles an hour to 90 miles an hour involves an enormous amount of other track improvements, changing the curvature of track, improvements to the track, changes to grade crossings. And when we modeled it, having 90 mile an hour speed limit rather than 80 miles an hour speed limit, with the stops and other things associated with the existing track geometry, the whole trip, 180 miles from Fort Collins to Pueblo, we would only gain 4 minutes. So for us, that juice is not worth the squeeze. That the 80 mile an hour speed limit moves you up and down the Front Range in competition with a car. Spending a whole lot more money and time is not worth the 4 minutes that we would gain in travel speed. So that's Front Range passenger rail, and we are aiming at ultimate build out of 10 round trips a day. So 10 round trips all the way from Fort Collins to Pueblo and eventually to Trinidad. But again, we're not letting grass grow under our feet. We want to deliver this as soon as possible. And so the first phase is something that you may have heard about called joint service. And joint service is a really innovative partnership. And I have to give full credit to the governor's office for initiating this and to the state legislature for facilitating it and for creating several new revenue streams to make it possible. It's a partnership between the state, Front Range Passenger Rail, and RTD to deliver 3 round trips between Union Station and Fort Collins, and doing it entirely with existing resources. So without going to the ballot, without the uncertainty and risk associated with that, delivering on 3 round trips a day by 2029. Now, some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, there was fast tracks that was approved 20 years ago, and didn't fast tracks include a train to Boulder? And yes, it did. And very quickly, it became evident that that was utterly financially improbable, impossible. So very recently, RTD did a study called the Peak Service Study, where they said, well, okay, how about we think about, instead of building our own tracks, we use the existing freight rail tracks. We have 3 trains a day coming into Denver in the morning. It was a very Denver-centric plan. 3 trains a day coming into Denver in the morning, and then 3 trains leaving in the evening. Could we do that? The answer was, with existing resources, the answer was yes, we could probably pull that off by 2050. Again, that does not seem like delivering the train to you. That's delivering the train to your grandchildren, and that's not acceptable. Front Range Passenger Rail, it's fewer stops. It's frequency of building up to 10 round trips a day, but we still have to get to the ballot. By combining our resources, by combining the planning and preliminary work of Front Range Passenger Rail, as well as with RTD, with some RTD resources, and using the state, the fee revenue that the state created, that the state legislature created, we can add some stops so that we're hitting more of what RTD wanted to hit. We can have 3 round trips a day, but these are real round trips. In other words, you can get from Fort Collins to Denver and Denver to Fort Collins in the morning, same thing in the afternoon, same thing in the evening. It's not as Denver-centric as we talked about it, and we can deliver that by 2029. So that's the fiendish plan as it exists today. So next steps, we're going to complete the service development plan, so we have that, so we can start doing environmental work on the whole corridor. Excuse me. We're going to continue doing public education and coalition building, building to a ballot. And in the meantime, we're doing joint service, and we've already begun negotiations with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, who owns the freight rail tracks north of Denver, and doing the financial planning to make that happen. So here's the last slide, this classic picture, happy family riding the train, enjoying the view of the Front Range that they're enjoying. And as many of us know, the next generation of people coming behind us are not as excited about cars as we were when we were young. They want this option. They want an opportunity to not drive and take a train to get to their destinations, to explore the Front Range. It'll mitigate congestion, it'll reduce pollution, create economic development. We think this is an amazing opportunity, and we want to deliver it to you. So that's it. How long did I take, Joel? Did I keep my promise?
Yeah, I think we can take 5 minutes for questions. We'll just run over a bit, which is always a risk at the end of the meetings. And I see Amy Ford has
I
joined
suppose
us
that's
to
true.
join next, but she has a very targeted topic, so I think we'll be safe. So the
Okay.
most upvoted question we have here has to do with using the freight rail, and of course, in light of what's happened in other parts of the country. So Nathan, Harvey, do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, this is probably something you guys have considered, and I might have some misconceptions about it, but it's my understanding that although freight rail operators are like legally required to yield to passenger rail, that it often just doesn't happen. What's like the relationship with the freight rail owners, and like what's going to prevent them, for example, from, squeezing us out any moment they want or hiking prices, all of those kind of considerations?
That's exactly the right question. So the freight railroads are in the business of making money, and they make their money by carrying freight. So if we interfere with that, we would definitely be second banana. But the access agreement, which we would negotiate with them, is a binding contract between the parties, and that establishes, who has rights of way when, and kind of the way it works is what you are leasing from the railroad is not just space, but time. So you're saying, this is our schedule, this is when we're running the trains, this belongs to us during that time, and the freight runs at different times. So there's a whole, you got to negotiate that, and you pay for it for sure. But that's how that works. The other element of access to the freight railroads is, anyone can negotiate an access agreement with the railroads, or you can try. But if Amtrak is your operator, and I think Amtrak comes with a whole lot of advantages as your operator, Amtrak actually has a federal right to operate on the freight railroad lines. So they cannot be precluded. The freight railroads can say yes or no to anybody else, but to Amtrak, the answer has to be yes. It's just what the details are, and that's up to negotiation.
And that's a question we could go into more, but of course, you're very aware of the troubles that Amtrak has had in practice.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Okay, all right. And
Michael, there are no perfect options here. I mean,
okay.
The perfect option would be to have all the land we need and build the rails we want and run the trains as fast as the dickens. That's not really an option.
Yeah, yeah. Michael Henry has a follow-on question. I'll just read. Because the freight rail folks are with you in these discussions, are they cooperative and willing, or hostile, or what's the tone of this?
They've actually been great. So there are plenty of conversations that we need to have that have to do with the freight railroads, and we gently excuse them from the meeting when we're engaging in those conversations. But they've actually been great partners, and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe in particular has been great. They've flown people in from Fort Worth, which is where their headquarters is, to have conversations with us. They have a good relationship with Amtrak. They host passenger rail in a lot of places, including up in Seattle, and they've been good. They've been good partners. We should not fool ourselves. Again, they're in the business. They're private companies in the business of making money, but they've been good partners so far.
Great. Stacy has a question about multimodal. Stacy?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the service and as it comes online and last mile, will there be a focus on making it easy for folks to bring their bikes on board to, bring their last mile solution with them on the train?
Yeah, absolutely. So with respect to Front Range Passenger Rail itself, we are very much, it is very much an imperative for us to be as multimodal as possible. In building up the service, I will tell you that, the initial service will probably be low platforms, like the way Amtrak is at Union Station, with stair boarding, like RTD light rail, because that is the cheapest thing we can start with. And again, our imperative is to get you the train as soon as possible. But in the service development plan is moving from that, not just improving service in terms of the number of trains we run, but improving the quality of the experience. So our ultimate platforms will be level platforms, level boarding, the way you experience on commuter rail with RTD, where the doors just open, you can roll in a wheelchair or a bike, and hang your bike up. So that's built into the service development plan. One other thing that I want to point out is we are very conscious of our partnership with local communities. So, we're bringing the train and the platform. You need to get onto the train, but everything else is the responsibility of local communities. We don't want to just leave them hanging. We want to be partners with them. So we have been talking about, when we get to the ballot, to have a ballot structure that involves some share back of revenue with the local communities, so that we're not just accommodating multimodalism on our train, the thing that we control, but we're actually helping to fund and facilitate multimodal infrastructure around the stations in all the communities that we serve.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. As always, we have a few more questions. You're welcome to stay and engage in chat with any of the questions we didn't get to, but we're going to turn to Amy Ford now. So thank you so much. Front Range Passenger Rail is pretty exciting, and the initial by 2029 without having to go to the voters, that's pretty exciting.
If we can pull it off, hope we can.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Howdy,
Okay,
Amy.
I sure hope they pull it off. And Chris has been, you guys, Chris is an incredible advocate, incredibly knowledgeable, has represented Denver in this effort for some time now. And we are really fortunate to have him be part of Front Range Passenger Rail. And he's not representing Denver, he's representing larger, but we are really fortunate to have him serving not just with sort of the insight on what's happening on the rail, but how you think about development around this and all. And so, I mean, he is going to be shaping the future of transportation here on the Front Range, and we're really fortunate to have him be a part of this.
That's very kind of you.
Well, and maybe a Waymo vehicle will take someone to a station so they then can get on to Front Range Passenger Rail. So who knows? Boom. There's the first mile, last mile. That's what I'm here to talk about today.
Great segue.
Well, welcome, Amy Ford, Executive Director of Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. And Waymo vehicles are not only coming, they're here. There was a photo on Reddit today of one here in Denver. So
I have not seen it yet. So okay.
All right.
They are here, and so I see. I was just looking at who's here at the meeting today, and some of you were at the Transportation Advisory Board when I spoke to folks on Tuesday about this as well. And so we'll come back into the conversation, and then feel free to ask questions, and otherwise as we go into this. And so I'll sort of share the facts of what's happening, and then we can sort of talk about the bigger picture of what we're seeing here. So Waymo did make an announcement that they're coming to Colorado, and very specifically, they're coming to Denver as a starting point. And I led off on Tuesday by talking a little bit about the Colorado law that allows for all of this. So a few years ago, in fact, I was probably involved in some of this. Well, I wasn't probably, I was involved in some of this as we sat and considered what it would be to allow automated vehicles and autonomous vehicles in Colorado. One of the things that it is Colorado law says this: if you can follow the rules of the road, automated vehicles are allowed in Colorado. If you cannot, then you need to be following up with Colorado Department of Transportation, Colorado State Patrol, and then within the local jurisdictions, and set and establish a pilot program and otherwise to allow you to operate within a certain design domain. And Waymo can do the former. They can follow all of the rules of the road. So that's consequently when I say that they announced that they were coming, that is how they do it. They're like, we're here. This is what we can do. The state and others say, yes, you can follow those rules of the road, and therefore they can come into the state. And so with all of that is a collaboration, and that is something that Waymo will be doing in concert with us, with local officials and others, both state and local. And effectively what you saw today, as you see them rolling around, is there's going to be a fleet of about 10 to 12 or so, give or take, Waymo vehicles. And if you've been in LA or in Phoenix or in Scottsdale or in Austin or in San Francisco, and now as they very quickly start to roll them out in Miami and Atlanta and soon to be DC and others, what you're seeing is about 10 to 12 vehicles in a couple of different types of fleet. One is the I-Pace Jaguar, which is an electric vehicle that is mostly what you see in places like LA and otherwise. And then you will also see coming onto the road another vehicle called a Zeekr, and a Zeekr is actually a Chinese-made, custom-made for within Waymo minivan service that is also electric. That is also the vehicle that they have been using in their four-season testing, which they've been doing pretty extensively in other states, Michigan, New York, and others. So here in Colorado, you'll see those vehicles out on the road with drivers. So you're going to see them as they go in and they effectively map their operational domain, what they're going to be doing here within the central Denver area. And then over time, that area will grow. You'll see folks there in the vehicles as they do this, and gosh, you know, they'll be mapping and getting within like a quarter inch of the curb, or probably an eighth, even finer grain detail, as that informs their automated driving system, their ADS systems. You'll then see them pull those drivers, or those, I will call them safety support folks, out of the vehicles, and the vehicles will continue to run and test and operate within our road environments. And then eventually you will see them start service. Now, there's a couple of things, and I still don't have all the detail. I need to double check, like how they are categorized when they run services and things like that. Are they categorized as a TNC, Transportation Network Company? I believe they are in Colorado law, and that would becomes authorized for paid service and stuff through the PUC, if that's some of the case. And we will collaborate with them. And the collaboration that we will have, and so is how they will engage with us, public engagement and others, and we've offered to sort of set and you know, how and support them as they go out and engage with public and others, and talking about what they are doing and their services and that. There'll be collaboration and focus on operations, as we will sort of watch and monitor and observe what they are doing, and you know, information and data sharing, for instance, on things like disengagements when the car decides to stop or do something different. As well as then law enforcement. You know, there's a component to this, and sort of when those vehicles are operating our roads, what happens if it gets into a crash? What happens if it stops in the middle of the road, doesn't move? What happens, etc. And so those pieces are elements that they will be working with us and collaborating on. And, you know, a part of this and some of the deployment and sort of the playbook, if you will, that they're using in this is that as they bring these out, that having the conversations and having that engagement also is supported by the idea of people being able to sort of touch, feel, see, understand, and operate, you know, and how these vehicles move and operate in the system. So, yeah, Colorado will be the first four-season. They as I said on the meeting at the Transportation Advisory Board, they said Denver and Seattle. I don't think Seattle's probably quite four-season the way we're four-season, but we in Seattle were announced here last week, and so that is what they were on, and that's fantastic. I knew they were coming very soon. I thought they were coming this week, but some of you have already seen them, so that's extraordinary. So So yeah, let's sit and chat. I'd love to answer questions. I know very much that they are interested in engaging also with public and with groups and others about this service, how it works, you know, any questions. And yes, you will see them starting to move around. Nathan, if you don't mind, and Joel, I'm just sort of looking at the chat as we go. You asked a question about where they're storing the cars. It's obviously they're electric. They will be storing. They will be charging at night, and I do not know that yet. They're in the process of negotiating, I think, their sort of final spot where they will have that storage, and I'm not aware of where that is exactly yet. And so yeah, Lucia, I see your comment about not engaging with rideshare drivers. You know, it's an interesting thing. I went on Reddit as I was just sort of scrolling around a little bit after the announcements. I was just curious to see how Denverites and others were responding to this and what they would see and what they would look. And many folks, yes, many folks actually have a perspective that you do, where they made this comment about preferring actually this kind of an option to one where they're in with rideshare drivers. And so it is an interesting observation. And in fact, that was a lot of the thread. So yeah, I think it will be something that we'll see as we continue. Bruce, you're totally right. I completely wore the same outfit from Tuesday to the other. Tuesday, I had this outfit on for legit. It's I'm advertising for our climate action program, the Do Something, Do More, Do Less. And then I had it on the floor, and I went for a bike ride earlier tonight before this meeting, so I could just get some exercise in. I wore the shirt, and I showed up too late, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna look really scuzzy if I just show up in a t-shirt. And so I threw the jacket back on over it. So yeah, same outfit. Anyway, okay, Tom. We've been convinced that going with the flow is actually safer than following the rules. Is the same idea as the cars are being programmed for. Maybe ask that question again. Are you saying that, if I'm interpreting it right? Yeah, go ahead, Thomas. What do you?
If you scroll up, he said that he passed 2 on East First today by the Country Club, and they were going the same speed as the rest of traffic, which was greater than the speed limit.
Interesting.
So not following the rules of the road.
Interesting. I'm a little surprised to hear that, and because typically their operations is very rule following. In fact, to the frustration of a lot of folks. They might have it as a calibrated piece because, as you know, there are some interesting elements. If you are not keeping with the speed of what the rest of the vehicles are, then actually it can be a detrimental piece because you're in an environment where it's not actually, you're causing a more safety issue if in fact you are a lot slower, for instance, than the rest of the vehicles. So I would suspect maybe they've got some programming that sort of sits in that. But yeah, it's a fair question. My understanding is typically very rule abiding in following that. So but that's a good question. Maybe the safety driver was actually driving. I don't know. And you guys saw it. Was there a person in the driver's seat? They may have been driving. Yeah, they may have been driving. It may not have been in autonomous mode. They're typically pretty steady Eddie with speed limits and such. But yeah.
How should we start to adapt?
Thomas, I don't think we're really hearing you. Amy, are you hearing Thomas?
No.
No. I don't think your microphone is doing what it should do, Thomas. Maybe one of my questions is understanding that there's state regulations that allow them to be here. It's not a question for Denver whether to allow them or not.
Right.
Going beyond just allowing them, is Denver doing anything to learn lessons from what happened in other cities? So for instance, you talked about law enforcement. How soon will law enforcement have what other cities learned they needed in terms of the ability to reach in and turn it off and that kind of thing? And, or secondly, one of the things we've seen in, I think, San Francisco and other places is the place that they park overnight and charge, they're constantly honking their horns and making noise and keeping everyone up. I mean, these are just examples, but what is Denver doing to learn and then require appropriate reactions based on what other cities have learned?
Yeah, no, really good question. And so one of the things we've done is we've put together a bit of an operations group, and I spoke with DPD. So where we're going to be sitting down and meeting with them, we're also going to be reaching out to some other jurisdictions just to understand sort of what their engagements have been, how that's worked, things that they've done within, let's say, data sharing or otherwise, and sort of those collaborations. Sorry, my cat has decided that she very much wants to be a part of this call. And so that's something that we're in the process of doing with the law enforcement, especially. Waymo has a pretty extensive support group, law enforcement. It's ironic because actually I presented with one of the leaders of that particular group last year. There was a GIS safety, GHIS safety conference here in Denver, and so I was presenting with them when we were talking about these topics. And so they have a lot of former law enforcement who do training and otherwise and engagements to work with the local law enforcement on sort of some of those pieces, those interactions, and that kind of thing. And so yeah, I think as we move through this process, that you will see that continued collaboration. You'll see us sort of learning the lessons and asking our fellow jurisdictions how they've engaged and what they've seen and observations and otherwise. And you're right. And I think the focus of this, and every group is different. Waymo has, I'm going to say, a reputation right now of being collaborative and open and transparent and working with the locals and local officials in how they ensure success of these deployments on the roads. Others that do not, such as, let's say, Cruise in San Francisco, are now no longer, right? And but it's a really good question, Joel, and that's something actually I've got a meeting coming here next week with some team members where we're going to be sitting and talking and starting some of that engagement as we go.
Thanks. Thomas has another question in the chat.
Yeah.
If you want to look at that.
Yeah, let me scroll down as we go. The education process for other common space users. Yeah. And what are your expectations of behavior? It's a good question, Thomas. And I think that that's something also that Waymo would like to engage the public with about what it is to be in and around an automated vehicle. I can tell you just sort of in general, and this is, going back to sort of my level of experience and working with this over the last several years. I work a lot in that advanced mobility space, if you will. Is your expectation is that that you behave as per usual, and they are expecting and they are working and they are programming these vehicles, if you will, to operate with people who are following the rules of the road, who are behaving, so to speak, in the ways that they need, that they are riding safely, they are doing all the things, and they are on the lookout for you, so to speak. As you know, these particular vehicles, these are they see, if you will, vis-a-vis their cameras as well as LiDAR. So they're pretty advanced detection systems that feed the system. And so, in fact, they have maybe in many ways better eyes on the road than a human driver in many regards. And so that's an important thing, is sort of they see and detect and operate. And obviously, as we know, they've operated several hundreds of million miles now without any major incidents, fatalities. But nonetheless, I think eventually you will see one. I think that will eventually happen in some sad and tragic way. It's they see a lot, they try to observe a lot. They are, as Nathan, and I think I'm going to take your comment. They are exceptionally cautious, and if they see a situation where they believe there is any risk in environment, they will either slow, stop, pull themselves over, and so there is a real standard. And that too, if you read some of what's happened in San Francisco or otherwise, has also caused frustration for people. Like, hey, I'm cautious, I'm moving over, I'm pulling over. They will pull over into areas that people question, or sometimes they have gotten confused. They pulled over into each other and they just sort of circled around each other. So there are instances where you absolutely will see some of that. And but I think, Tom, you've brought up a fair thing, and that's something that Waymo is wanting to work on as well. Sort of have that touch it, feel it, and those conversations.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on late notice. And this is being recorded, as always. We're going to post this on the INC YouTube channel. So people interested in, who knew this was on the agenda, couldn't make it tonight, will hear directly from you. And then it was really good for me to hear that you're going to be having a team and reaching out to peer cities that have already had these to learn what lessons they've already learned, so we don't have to learn them from scratch. And that would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. We've reached the end of our agenda. We meet every other month on the odd-numbered months on the second Thursday of the month. So we have one more meeting coming up this year, and then we'll be following the same pattern again in the coming year. Thanks so much.